Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever really stopped to think about what drives you? I mean, not just your big life goals, but those deep, undeniable cravings? Well, today we're diving into the hidden brain circuit that's pulling all the strings, the one that governs desire itself. And we're going to use David Linden's incredible book, The Compass of Pleasure, as our map. You're going to see how this one single pathway is the key to understanding, well, just about everything, from who we fall in love with to our most dangerous addictions. So let's just start with a pretty wild question, one that gets right to the heart of all this. What if you could have pure, unfiltered pleasure, but the price was everything else? Your health, your relationships, your very will to survive. How high a price would you actually be willing to pay?
See, this isn't just some philosophical thought experiment. Nope, this is the true story of a scientific accident, a tiny, misplaced wire in a laboratory that accidentally flipped the master switch for pleasure in the brain, with some pretty shocking results.
Okay, let's get right into this experiment. It's a story that is, frankly, bizarre, but also absolutely groundbreaking, and it all starts with some very, very motivated lab rats.
So picture this. It's 1953. Two researchers, James Olds and Peter Milner, are trying to study what wakes the brain up. But they made a tiny mistake. They missed their target and put an electrode in a totally different part of a rat's brain. And that is when things got really, really weird. They noticed the rat kept going back, obsessively, to the one corner of the cage where it got that little electrical zap.
And this is where the sheer power of their discovery became kind of terrifyingly clear. They hooked that electrode up to a little lever that the rat could press itself. And the result? The rats would just mash that lever, relentlessly. We're talking thousands of times an hour. They would choose that jolt over food until they literally starved. They'd run across painful electrified grids just for one more press. This wasn't just a treat, it was more powerful than survival itself.
So what in the world had they found? Well, Olds and Milner had accidentally tapped in to the biological star of our whole story, the medial forebrain pleasure circuit. The best way to think about it is like the brain's own superhighway for rewards. It's a network that uses a chemical messenger you've probably heard of, dopamine, to send one very simple, very powerful message. Yes, that felt amazing. Do it again.
This quote from David Linden just nails the massive shift in thinking that happened because of this. For decades, the assumption was that we were mostly driven by negative stuff, pushed forward by hunger, by fear, by pain. But this experiment proved with no doubt that we are also pulled forward, powerfully, by the simple promise of pleasure. Our brains are hardwired to chase joy.
All right, so if we all have this incredibly powerful pleasure circuit built right into our brains, what's it actually for? And, maybe the more important question in today's world is, how can it be hijacked?
So the most important thing to remember here is that this system didn't evolve for fun. Not at all. It is a brilliant survival tool. Evolution gave us this dopamine reward system to make sure we do the things that keep us and our species alive. Things like eating, drinking, and mating. They feel good for a very practical, biological reason.
Of course, for basically as long as this circuit has existed, humans have found some pretty clever ways to shortcut it. We've used all kinds of psychoactive substances to light up this reward system on command, for all sorts of reasons. You add Roman emperors using opium for transcendence, 19th century Irish drinkers using ether to get around alcohol bans, even Peruvian shamans using ayahuasca for spiritual journeys.
And this brings us right to the insidious trap of addiction. It's like a biological bait and switch that happens right inside this pleasure circuit. So neuroscientists make this really key distinction between liking, that's the actual pleasure you feel, and wanting, that's the craving to get it. With repeated use of something potent, the liking system kind of gets worn out. The pleasure actually goes down. But the wanting system, it goes into overdrive. It creates this intense, compulsive craving that just gets stronger and stronger, even as the reward gets weaker.
Okay, so let's see how this exact same principle works in the modern world. Because it's not just about substances anymore. Oh no, our everyday behaviors are now squarely in the crosshairs. Yeah, you heard that right. The exact same ancient wiring that drove those rats to press that lever, it's now being deliberately targeted by things like slot machines, by social media feeds, by video games. The biological mechanism is fundamentally the same.
Now, there is a key difference here. While both substance and behavioral addictions tap into the same pleasure circuit, how people recover can be pretty different. Breaking a chemical dependency often requires professional help, but studies suggest that a lot of people are actually able to overcome these behavioral compulsions on their own over time.
So what is it that makes something like gambling so unbelievably powerful? Well, it's basically a perfect storm for our dopamine system. Get this, it's not actually winning that provides the biggest jolt. It's the anticipation of the win. Even a near miss lights up the brain's reward centers like a Christmas tree. But the most powerful hook of all is uncertainty. Unpredictable rewards keep our brains guessing and wanting more. A trait that evolution probably gave us to keep us exploring for new food sources.
Okay, so all of this brings us to a fascinating and maybe slightly unnerving final question. What happens when our technology gets so good that we can engineer pleasure perfectly? What if we could just cut out the middleman entirely?
This is the kind of future that thinkers like Ray Kurzweil imagine. He pictures a time when we'll have brain-penetrating nanobots that could give us total control over our feelings and our senses. Just imagine, perfect pleasure on demand with just the tap of an app.
But not so fast. Our guide here, the neuroscientist David Linden, kind of throws some cold water on that whole idea. He argues that while our ability to collect data about the brain is growing like crazy, our actual understanding of it, well, that's moving along a much slower, more stubborn path. As he puts it, having a complete map of every wire in the brain is not the same thing as understanding how consciousness, or even pleasure, actually works.
But as this kind of technology gets closer and closer to reality, it forces us to deal with some enormous questions. I mean, think about it. If pleasure could be made perfectly safe, totally non-addictive, would we even consider moderation a virtue anymore? What would happen to human motivation, to art, to achievement, if sublime joy was just a button press away?
And this, really, is the ultimate takeaway. Understanding our brain's compass of pleasure isn't just about cool neuroscience. It forces us to ask what truly gives our lives meaning. If we could perfect pleasure and satisfy every single desire instantly, what would we have left to want? Would the entire human project of striving and creating and overcoming just lose its purpose? It's a huge question, and it's one we might all have to answer a lot sooner than we think.